Okay, welcome to Plastics and Climate Change Action, presented by the League of Women Voters of White Bear Lake area. We are so delighted that you could join with us today. I'm glad to see a few new faces. My name is Fern Panda, and I'm pleased to be here with Ketty Laurie, Liz Lauder, and Ketty Torrey, Liz Lauder, and Dan Torrey, who have all worked on this presentation long and hard. Stephanie McNamara also worked on this presentation, but could not be here tonight. And of course, our speaker, Jane Dow, who I will introduce later. If you have questions as we go through the presentation, please put them in the chat, and we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. But before we get started, I'd like to have one announcement. Just to talk about our next meeting, invite everybody to this next meeting. It's called Let's Get Ready for the Election 2024. It will be held on Thursday, April 11th at 6:30, and it's an in-person meeting. More details are coming out as we're planning this. Next. Okay. Most of you have been in a Zoom meeting before. Please keep yourself muted. This slide is a mini tutorial. You can see on the bottom of your screen, there's icons. This is where you mute, video change, chat, and in the corner, there's this view button. You can select speaker or gallery in the corner. We have a full agenda today. First up will be our speaker, Jane Dow. We'll go over our lead position on climate change. We will update you on the latest action in the state legislature. We will help you with recycling plastics and give you ideas on what personal actions you can take to reduce your plastic usage. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jane Dow, who we are so fortunate to have speaking to us today. Jane has been an environmental activist for many years. She co-founded Mankato Fair Trade and Mankato Zero Waste and helped start the organics recycling program in Mankato, North Mankato, and Lake Crystal. After taking 2 courses on plastic pollution from Judith Inc. at Bennington College, she was inspired to start a local chapter of the Beyond Plastics Nationwide project to end plastic pollution. She joined the Coalition for Plastic Reduction that is working with the legislators to pass 3 bills reducing plastic packaging, banning the toxic chemicals in plastics, and a bottle deposit refund bill.
Thank you, Fern, for that really nice introduction. And I feel very fortunate to be able to speak to you today. I really admire your work, and it's so important what you're doing, keeping track of the bills and encouraging people to support the correct bills. So I'm going to share my screen, which I just tried to do and it didn't work. Oh, here we go. Got it. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, I need to put it on slideshow. There we go. Okay, so Mankato Zero Waste works on reducing what goes to the landfill and is burned by reducing food scraps, keeping them out of the landfill and from being burned, and also reducing plastic from going to the landfill and being burned. And just for your interest, 2/3 of the 6 million tons of waste that we have could be reduced, reused, recycled, or composted. So we have ways to deal with this without sending things to the landfill, and we need to have legislation to make that happen. I'm going to talk about plastic pollution today because that is the biggest existential threat to our planet right now. There's been a whole lot of research that's just come out recently talking about what it's doing to all life on Earth, including ours and our health. And the biggest study that was done, called the Minderoo-Monaco Report, which was done by Dr. Landrigan and 48 other scientists and researchers, was called How Plastic is Destroying Our Planet. He's a renowned epidemiologist and pediatrician who spearheaded this research. It's a huge, long document just delving into every aspect of what plastic is doing to damage our Earth. But I want to just read the summary, in the opening statement of the summary, just to give you a sense of how pervasive this problem is. The level of scientific certainty is absolute. There is no doubt whatsoever that plastic causes disease, disability, permanent death, economic damage, and damage to ecosystems at every stage of its life cycle, which, interestingly enough, shockingly enough, I should say, costs about $1.5 trillion in healthcare costs in our society. So the implications are that it's causing us a lot of problems as far as costing us economically. The impacts of plastic pollution are far-reaching, accelerating climate change, creating greenhouse gases, polluting our air, land, and water, and impacting human health, especially among environmental justice, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. The single greatest health threat faced by humanity and all life on Earth is plastics. If we don't stop releasing these pollutants into our environment now, we may pass the tipping point that would cause ecosystem collapse, making continued life on Earth tenuous. And I want to talk about some of these issues because what he's saying is not an exaggeration. But first, I just want to reassure people, and I know that you probably already know this, there's a lot of legislation going through the legislature right now that will address this issue. And not only in our state, but in states all over the country and all over the world. And there's even a global treaty addressing the plastic pollution problem. So it is being worked on. I really have hope that there will be more legislation passed and we will be able to reduce plastic. So I want to warn you not to get depressed, but to understand that the work that you're doing is really important towards that goal. And don't let your desire to be well-informed interfere with your desire to remain sane, because we can all remain sane and still address this problem. So let's start with what the culture is that's created this mess. And it was all started by the plastics industry, unfortunately. Some of you may be old enough to remember Life magazine. This was one of the covers. And this kind of accentuates what the plastic industry was doing back then. They were trying to convince people to buy more plastic, and there was a great market for them. If the more plastic they bought and threw away, the more they would buy again. So there was a lot of profit to be made in throwaway plastic. So we started this whole culture of, oh, this gives us a lot of freedom to have throwaway plastic. Let's just keep buying this and throwing it away. We don't have to do dishes. We don't have to repair clothes. And that started the whole throwaway culture that we have today. Now, their plan, which is completely at odds with what we need to do right now, their plan is to ramp up their production of throwaway plastic because they are losing their market in renewable energy and fuel. So they're turning to, where can we make profit now? Well, there's a lot of profit to be made from producing throwaway plastic. And that's because plastic is part of the fracking, whole chain of events of fracking. And when you frack, there's this byproduct called ethane, and the ethane is what they use to make plastic. It would otherwise be flared off and lost, so they can make a profit off of something that would otherwise be lost. So this is why they're ramping up plastic production. And as you can see from this graph, in the 1950s, it was 2 million tons. And now it's all of a sudden exploded into 400 million tons at a very rapid increase in production. And they continue to want to increase this production. And if they're hoping to triple it by 2060, which would be 1.2 billion metric tons of production, which is, we have to stop that. We have to decrease it by a third if we're going to be able to save our oceans from being totally destroyed and save our planet. So we have the whole fracking industry, which is where plastics come from, and it gives off methane all along the whole chain of production, and it leaks out of the pipelines along the way to the plastic industry, petrochemical facilities, and there's more greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, and methane given off in the production of plastic. And all in all, what you're seeing here is 232 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions a year, which is equal to about 50 million cars. And it's slated to outpace coal emissions by 2030. So we've got a whole problem, huge problem with greenhouse gases being emitted in the production of plastic. And we are trying to get away from fossil fuels. So we don't need to be increasing the production. This is what it looks like for the people who live in these communities. They're trying to ramp up the production of more petrochemical facilities, which would be really disastrous for the communities around them, because they usually locate these in low income and communities of color. And that would be all along the coast of Mississippi River, from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. There are 90% of the emissions are in those 18 communities. And the people who live there are usually lower income and people of color. They do not have access to good quality health care, and they don't have the means to move. So they are stuck in this sort of hellhole, polluted area. The statistics say that they have much higher rates of brain cancer, lung diseases, kidney and organ damage, and leukemia and other cancers, as well as immune system compromised immune systems, and skin rashes, just a whole host of problems and illnesses. And they live 15 to 20 years less than the rest of the population. So this is an environmental justice issue as well. What we have to understand is that plastic never completely breaks down. It only breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. So all the 9 billion tons of plastic that we produced since the 1950s are still in our environment in small, tiny pieces, particles called nanoplastics. And it's not only the microplastics that are the issue, it's the chemicals that are added to plastics, because plastics are made from ethane and 13,000 chemicals that are added. And a lot of those chemicals are very toxic. So we've got a double issue there. And they are, as you can see, the production is increased exponentially. Half of the entire production of plastic was in the last 15 years. So we are really speeding up our greenhouse gas emissions. And as I said, the researchers and doctors are saying we have to decrease our production by a third, which we can easily do if we get rid of the packaging, the wasteful packaging and the throwaway plastic, because that's 40% of our production anyway. So starting with what it's doing to our planet, and then I'll talk about what it's doing to our health. It's in all of our water, air, and soil. And you can see left picture on the left, Lake Superior. There's been dumps of styrofoam periodically. That is impossible to clean up. It's too light and it blows around. And the little plastic pellets. And down below, you see it in the ocean, and it gets to the ocean from the rivers, which the Missouri River is on the right there. All the plastic that accumulates gets dumped into the ocean eventually, and it also comes from the shallow burial sites, landfills in the developing countries. So we have a big issue with plastic pollution of the oceans. Going back there for just a minute. Well, I won't. I'll talk about that later. So here's a picture of microplastics. The microplastics are the black picture on the right. They're about the size of a sesame seed. And on the left is the nanoplastics that the microplastics break down into, and even smaller pieces that are impossible to see with your eye. They're about the size of 1/8 of a blood cell. They're in all of the oceans. It's estimated now that there's 171 trillion particles of plastic in just the northern oceans. And we dump about from 10 to 25 million tons of plastic a year in our oceans, which is about 2 dump trucks a minute, which is really hard to fathom. So our oceans have become a giant landfill, basically. And it's predicted to be 40 million by 2025 if we don't stop. And the fish and the mammals, the animals, the birds, the marine animals are all dying from eating plastic because they think it's food. A lot of them are starving to death because when they get the plastic in their stomach, it interferes with the digestion and they aren't able to survive. This is an albatross feeding its young a whole mouthful of plastic, and of course that young will die. And albatrosses are now becoming extinct because of that. And it's not just that they're eating the plastic, it's that they're getting entangled in the fishing nets that have been thrown over into the ocean. And they also cause this nets drag along and cause problems for the coral reefs, as well as the plants in the ocean, and they suffocate animals. So turtles are being damaged. Here's a picture just to give you an understanding of how pervasive this plastic problem is. This is a whale that they opened up his stomach and found 64 pounds of plastic in it. And he obviously died from plastic ingestion. And the phytoplankton and the plankton, which are the lowest part of the chain, food chain in the ocean, have a very important function of drawing carbon out of the air. And those phytoplankton and plankton are also filtering plastic, which is interfering with their ability to function to keep our oceans healthy. But it's not just the ocean that's being affected by plastic, it's also the land interfering with our soil health as well. And up on the top left, you see a plant that's taken up plastic and it interferes with its ability to grow. And so it's affecting crop yields. Over to the right, you can see how pervasive it is. It's even in the snowflakes, as well as the rain that comes onto Earth. And then down on the left, you see all the plastics in the soil are interfering with the decomposer's ability to break down compost to make the soil healthy. And you need the decomposers to break down the organic matter to have healthy soil. And the reason that there's so much plastic in the soil is because of the microplastics in our polyester clothing. 70% of our clothing is polyester. When we put it in the washing machine, the microfilaments shed off of the clothing and end up going to the wastewater treatment plant where they are not filtered out because there's no filter to filter out microplastics and nanoplastics, and they end up in the sludge. And of course, that sludge ends up on the farmland. So you may wonder, what is the biggest production of plastic? It's actually throwaway packaging. And you probably all know this from, you have some pictures later on to show just how much excessive packaging there is, plastic in just ridiculous amounts in all of our products that don't need to be there. And the second biggest production is in textiles, clothing, which is of course polluting our water and land. It comes from the 3 different big sources, and it is attracted to dust, and dust carries it all over the world. And that's why we find it in the most remote areas of the world where people haven't even gone. If you go someplace that nobody's been, you'll find plastic. And that's because it's in our soil, which we already just talked about. So when the soil blows up, that takes the plastic into the dust catches it and travels around the world. It also comes from tires from the plastic in our tires on the roads. When they drive along the roads, the friction blows the particles into the dust in the air, and it travels around the world. And also from our oceans, which are so saturated by plastic now that they evaporate and it gets carried around. They say we are breathing in about 272 microplastics from this dust. Now, they've done a whole bunch of studies recently, and you'll probably read them. The Consumer Reports just came out with one where researchers are testing all the food just to see how pervasive it is in our food. They're finding that it's in most all of our food right now because of the plastic containers and the plastic from the food growing in the water, etc. But they're, interestingly enough, the highest percentage of plastics that they have found is in bottled water and bottled beverages in plastic bottles. And they have just done a very recent study and found 250,000 to 500,000 nanoplastics per liter of bottled water. So their estimate is that we're breathing in and eating about 3.8 million particles a year, which is frightening to think about. It's also in our homes, it's in our cleaning products, it's in our clothing, which we mentioned before, it's in our cosmetics and our personal care products, and it's in paints. PFAS is very high percentage in paints. Vinyl flooring, which you probably don't think about so much, that's PVC. Shower curtains has PVC, and polyester carpets. So if you can choose other materials than those, like for flooring, use bamboo or cork or wood, and shower curtains use cotton, and polyester use cotton or wool. Carpets, and try to think about the products that you buy and try to avoid the plastic, because it all sheds into the air and we're breathing it in, which is not good. So getting to the health now, the health effects. There's two different health effects. One is from the microplastics themselves that we breathe in and eat, and the other is from the chemicals that are added to the microplastics. So I'm going to start with what the microplastics do to our health. We breathe them in and eat them, and they are jagged edged, and they are able to get through the lining of our lungs and our intestines and get into our bloodstream. And once they're in the bloodstream, they can get into our blood cells. When they're in our blood cells, they can cause damage to our blood cells and death. And they can also travel around our whole body and cause damage when they get into our organs, especially the kidney and the liver. And they cause problems in our lungs and in our intestines. And a study that just came out last month by the New England Journal and Science and Technology Journal documented surgeons who were doing surgery on people who had strokes and heart attacks. When they opened up their blood vessels, they found a high percentage of microplastics that had embedded in the plaque in their blood vessels. And they are assuming that this is what caused the heart attacks and strokes. They're going to probably research this more. They see the connection, but they have to make sure that this is what's actually happening. But it seems fairly likely that this is what is happening. And they also have found a high percentage of microplastics in the feces of people who have intestinal disorders like irritable bowel syndrome, etc. So we're actually documenting the microplastics in our bodies and what they're doing. And the other research, there are two other research articles that came out documenting what it's doing to our brains. And they now think, because we have microplastics in our brain, that might be interfering with our memory and causing things like Alzheimer's and memory loss in people. So there's a lot of disruptive problems coming from microplastics. Plus, our body sees these particles as artificial foreign matter, and it sets up a whole inflammatory response. So it also compromises our immune system. And pediatricians are saying that they are seeing children having less effective results from vaccinations because of the compromising of their immune systems, as well as obesity and other problems. Now, moving along to the chemicals that are added to plastics, they add tons of chemicals to add color and form and shape and to make them flexible or rigid or firm. And a lot of these chemicals are very toxic, and they do not have to test these chemicals before they put them in. So they put them out to our consumers without having tested them for safety. And it turns out that there's two big categories of chemicals that doctors are now red flagging. You can see these red flags. They're called persistent organic pollutants, which means that they're bad for us. And there's the one category is everywhere chemicals. They're both categories are considered to be hormone disruptors. Then the other category is called forever chemicals. So the everywhere chemicals we are eating on a continual basis, and that's why they're causing problems, even though we can eliminate them. And they are interfering with our hormones system. So they are causing obesity, metabolic disorders, reproductive disorders. If you look at the right side of the categories, the column here, neurodisruptors, cardiovascular disruptors, and cancers. And particularly obesity, they're seeing obesity in children. They're seeing early onset diabetes, an increase in that. They're seeing an increase in ADHD and autism as from fetal development, and also cancers, breast and prostate cancer particular high percentage of that from these endocrine hormone disruptors, as well as a decrease in our ability to reproduce. So they're seeing a decrease in fertility. And over the last 50 years, fertility has decreased by a half. So this is serious as far as, are we going to be able to reproduce in the future? And that's what they're worried about, as well as the brain functions. And then the ones that are forever chemicals, we have trouble eliminating. They're attracted to fat, so we store them in our bodies, and they cause problems by interfering with our hormones again. This is a chart of what's being, what they're doing. They're mimicking hormones and interrupting the hormone release at the right times and in the right quantities. The plastic, the bisphenols, which was the everywhere chemical, that's in the lining of cans, and it may say BPA free, but it still has BPS and BPF, and those cause infertility, obesity, diabetes, cancers, and immune system compromise, as well as ADHD. And then the phthalates, which are the other forever everywhere chemicals, they cause high blood pressure. They interfere with our cardiovascular system, so they cause high blood pressure and high cholesterol and high all the the things that I mentioned before about strokes and heart attacks. Infertility is the biggest concern, and the cancers of the reproductive organs, and also the brain function. Our thyroid controls our brain function, and so these mimicking hormones interfere with our brain's ability to function properly, and can cause, that's what's causing the ADHD and the autism. The Italian doctor studied minnows to see what effect plastics and minnows had, because he was seeing that minnows seem to have a lot of plastic. He was doing that because we've now found that there's plastic in our fetuses, and that wondering what it's doing to their ability, their formation, and their ability to grow up to be normal people. And what he found in the minnows is that it caused deformities, miscarriages, low birth weight rate, and stillbirths, as well as brain function problems. And he's very concerned about what it's doing to the fetal brains. And it also causes deformities and development of reproductive systems, as well as sex differentiation. So we're asking for a lot of trouble as we try to get more plastic out of our environment as quickly as possible. Then the other study that I think is fairly important, because people a lot of times think, I'll just use reusable plastic. Well, Copenhagen did a study on reusable plastics and found that there was just as many chemicals and sloughing of microplastics into the bottles as there is in the throwaway bottles. So that is not an effective solution. You need to just stop using plastic. There were over 200 chemicals when they first let the water sit in these bottles for 24 hours, and then when they put them through the dishwasher, the chemicals that combined with the soap residue and leached other chemicals were actually in the 3,500 range, and a lot of them were considered unsafe for human consumption. So beware, don't heat up plastic, and try not to use it if you can. Now, I know that you are going to cover a lot of the plastics, so I'm just going to make a couple of quick points about this. We've got 7 different triangles. Don't mean that it's recyclable, it just tells you what it's made from. 1 and 2 are okay, and 5, but 1 you should only use once, because it deteriorates very quickly and leaches chemicals very quickly. So it was made to use once. And 1, 2, and 5, a lot of the chemicals have never been tested, so you don't know if they're safe. 3 and 6 you should not use. They are both considered hazardous waste, and they are known carcinogens. 3 is PVC, which is very lethal and is now being up to be banned completely from our environment because it's so carcinogenic and it has so many toxins. And number 6 is styrofoam. It says PS polystyrene. You look at it, you think it's recyclable. It's not. And when you put hot liquids in it, it accelerates the leaching of the toxins, which are benzene and styrene. So I'm just going to say that much, and then you can talk about the rest. Number 7 is a combination of different things that aren't recyclable. So the plastics industry has this great way of saying, oh, don't worry, we'll keep producing plastic, we'll just recycle better. But they have always known that they can't recycle it. In fact, if you look at their memos, they have admitted to themselves that recycling is impossible and not practical. So they're really lying, and they're lying so that they can keep producing plastic, and we won't will be soothed into this complacent thought that it's okay because they're going to recycle it. Half of our recycling is now shipped overseas because we don't want to recycle it and can't recycle it. They can't recycle it, of course, and so it ends up contaminating their environment. And can you imagine this? They have to they burn it in open fields, a lot of it, or they bury it in shallow landfills. So they are really suffering from our colonial mentality of exporting the things we don't want to them so that it can ruin their health. Anyway, the other part that's a problem with recycling is that when the recycling plants have to shred up the plastics to make new products, and when they do that, a huge amount of microplastics are shed into the air in the recycling plants and around the area outside the recycling plants, and they've measured 400,000 tons of microplastics that are shed in a year, and that's all going into our environment, and that's the equivalent of 29,000 dump trucks of microplastics. So obviously, we're just making the problem worse by recycling. Incineration is no better. They always say, oh, incineration's the answer, but the incineration creates tremendous amount of toxic pollutants. In fact, it's the pollutants that it's put out is equal to 1.6 million cars driven for a year. So that's obviously just adding more carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases to our environment, which we don't need to do. And the last little trick in their bag is they say, oh, we're going to do chemical recycling. That's the solution. We're developing this whole great way of melting down the plastic and making new products. But in fact, in reality, the chemical recycling isn't making new products. It's being melted down to make dirty fuels, which are used in things like as airplane fuel. And it's, again, emitting a huge amount of greenhouse gases. So it's a fossil fuel. No matter what you do with it, it's going to end up contributing damage and contributing to climate change in our environment. Making it into a fuel is not the answer. So you're going to talk about the bills right now, so I'm not going to talk about those, but there's a couple of things that you can do locally. To your city council, you can, and maybe it's already been done in your cities, depending on where you're from. You can ask citizens in your town to sign a resolution to have a fee on plastic bags and skip the stuff. And skip the stuff is a national campaign where you ask the restaurants and food places to not give out plastic straws, condiment packets, and utensils unless people ask for them. And it's a very simple ask that you would not do that because the restaurants save money. So it's a no-brainer, and they usually will say, yes, I'll do that. And there are two organizations that help to implement this campaign. They will come to your community and offer grants to help your restaurants switch from unsustainable packaging and unsustainable throwaway food containers to reusable, sustainable materials like metal, glass, and paper in place. And they have lots of really great grants, and they really follow through when you ask them to come and help you out. They're excellent. I've had them come and talk to 5 different restaurants in our town, and the outcome was really good. So I would really encourage you to try to start a Skip the Stuff campaign, and whatever you need to do to decrease plastic in your community. And you can also sign a petition to President Biden saying, be a plastic-free president. And then there's a whole bunch of letters that I've put out, e-waste recycling, and letters to Coca-Cola Company asking them to speed up. They have a pilot project right now where they are using refillable bottles like they used to in the old days. So there's a letter saying we really support this and make it a bigger project and do it all over the country. And then there's 4 letters to big box stores and grocery stores asking them to reduce their plastic packaging sourcing, as well as a letter to the EPA supporting their PVC ban, and a letter to federal government legislators to ban chemical recycling and not allow it to be called recycling, which is some of the bills are trying to get that inserted so that they can count that as recycling when it's really not. So that's I'm done. And just number 10, these chemicals you should look for in your cosmetics and your cleaning products. And if they are there, don't buy them again. That's just the number 10. The rest you're going to, the people who are doing the next part of this presentation will talk about things you can do to reduce plastic. So I'm done. And I'll hand it over to you then, Fern.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Jane, for a sobering and informative talk. Are there any questions? Ketty, did you see a question in the chat that we should cover right now?
Yes, there were a few questions in the chat. The first was, what are nurdles?
I should have explained that. Those are these little teeny beads that when they make plastic, they melt. They take the ethane and they crack it into a bunch of different gases, and then they cool them down and and shred them into these little balls that they call nurdles. And then those nurdles are shipped to all the different plastic producers, and they use them to make different kinds of plastic.
And then the next question we had was, are these chemicals listed on the packaging of the products?
No, they are not. And they are not tested. So those are 2 big issues. And we need to there's one state, Washington State, which shocked me that they actually got this passed, just recently passed a bill saying that any product being put out for consumer use, especially with food, has to be tested for safety first. And that's the first state to do that. And we all need to do that, because that needs to be something that we just don't allow these chemicals to be put out anymore without safety testing. That's what's causing, when Dr. Landegren was talking about how we are at the tipping edge of ecosystem collapse, he was talking about all these chemicals. It's not just plastics, it's cleaning products and fuels and all kinds of things that we're putting in our environment that's just destroying all of life and just messing up our whole ecosystem. So we got to stop doing that.
Okay, and then the last question that had come in was, yes, we can cease to use plastics, but what clean ways are they to get rid of everything that's already in the environment?
Yeah, that's another big point. For instance, so we just passed that PFAS ban, and now they're trying to figure out how to get PFAS out of our environment. And PFAS is a chemical, just like bisphenols and phthalates. It was a chemical added to plastic. And they finally realized that it was causing so many health problems that they passed this ban. And now the discussion is, well, how do we get it how are we going to filter this out of all of our water and all of our products and all of our machinery? And it's going to cost billions and billions of dollars to come up with solutions. Same thing we're going to have to do with all these chemicals. And I wish them the best of luck.
Okay, so the National League of Women Voters has a position on climate change since 2019. League believes climate change is a serious threat facing our nation and our planet. The League supports climate goals and policies that are consistent with the best available climate science that will ensure a stable climate system for future generations. Individuals, communities, and governments must continue to address this issue while considering the ramifications of their decisions at all levels: local, state, regional, national, and global. This one position can be used for all levels of League to lobby for change at all levels of government. Combating climate change is a high priority for League. To help league members keep up with the latest developments, the State League formed a climate change task force. Any league member can join the task force. They meet via Zoom the first Wednesday of each month, 9:30 to 10:30. I've been attending those meetings for close to 2 years now, and it was at one of those meetings I first heard Jane Dow speak. If you would like to join, you just can go to the State League's website. There's a place to join there. The 2024 legislative priorities for the task force include working on solutions to climate change with a focus on zero waste solutions, protecting clean water, and being a watchdog for environmental regulators. State League continues to support the Minnesota Environmental Partnership, and this organization helps with lobbying efforts. This year, Minnesota legislature has a shortened session. It only started February 12th, and some of the first deadlines are fast approaching. We hope we can move forward passing an extended producer responsibility law, ban toxic substances from packaging, deposit return system, and also reduce single-use packaging. Okay, the big problem, increase of packaging waste. When you buy many products, you get a lot of packaging. The picture on the left shows the packaging for a toaster. So many of the items you can recycle, like the cardboard. Others, like the styrofoam, are difficult to recycle if you can at all. The picture on the right shows a very small tube of something that was sent in a huge box filled with all these plastic bubbles for protection. These two items illustrate the huge amount of packaging waste. E-commerce and delivery economy has just made the amount of waste to grow. While retail stores like grocery stores are finding more ways to use plastic. The burden of managing these ever-growing mountains of packaging waste falls with the government and taxpayers. Over 50% of waste is disposed in landfills or incinerated. The system produces greenhouse gases, toxic air pollutants, and after years of stagnant recycling rates, it's clear we simply cannot recycle our way out of the problem. The solution, an extended producer responsibility law. EPR policies hold producers responsible for their products and packaging throughout the entire life cycle. The law would reduce the burden of counties to find solutions for trash while also encouraging manufacturers to design products easier to recycle, reuse, or dispose of safely without hazardous materials. Since 2019, more than a dozen U.S. states have introduced producer responsibility for packaging legislation. The first 4 laws in U.S. passed in Oregon and Maine in 2021 and Colorado and California in 2022. What these laws do is force the producers to design their packaging for recycling. There needs to be environmental standards for packaging with clear labeling. This year, Minnesota legislature has introduced the Packaging Waste and Cost Reduction Act, which is an extended producer responsibility bill. This bill, I have been following it through the House. It moves to a different committee every week. I'm just hoping it will make it to the finish line. But this bill that's moving would hold producers accountable by having them pay a fee on the amount of packaging sold into the state. creating powerful incentive to move away from the production of environmentally harmful and excessive materials. It would shift the burden of managing this packaging, 40% of all plastic produced, from taxpayers to producers. There will be oversight by an advisory board appointed by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to oversee the Producer Responsibility Organization. The MPCA will hold enforcement responsibilities to meet the goals of the bill. The main goal of the bill: all packaging must be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. Last week, the State League sent out an action alert on this bill. If you received it, please return it and send it out. If you would like a copy of this action alert, just put your email in the chat, and I will forward it to you. Okay, so yes, we talked about all those toxic chemicals in plastic packaging. Well, there was a bill written. I think Jane talked about even helping to write it, but we've been told it's got lost on the reviser's desk. So hopefully there's still a chance for this one. This bill would ban toxic chemicals and materials found in plastic packaging. And packaging with toxins should not be recycled, burned, or put in landfills. And as Jane did mention, last year they did ban PFAS in food and beverage packaging, which was took effect as of January 1 of this year. And that also includes fast food packaging. Yeah, they put PFAS in fast food packaging. Okay, so container deposits, they're the rock star of recycling. Not only do container deposits increase rates of recycling, but they also have an array of other benefits. They reduce the overall cost of waste disposal and recycling collection because people are bringing their recycling to a redemption location. Bottle bills have effect of lowering environmental impact of bottles and cans by mitigating how many bottles and cans are littered and end up in landfills, and also how many new bottles and cans need to be made. There are 10 states that have bottle deposit laws, like California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, Oregon, and Vermont. So there was a beverage container recycling refund bill introduced this session. This bill requires most beverage containers made of glass, plastic, or metal, less than a gallon, to be sold with a deposit. The beverage producer organization will be responsible for funding the take back deposit and infrastructure to collect, recycle, or reuse the beverage containers. Retailers are not required to have redemption centers. The proposed refund value, 10 cents for beverage containers less than 24 ounces and 15 cents for containers over 24 ounces. So I did go to the hearing on this in the House. There was environmental groups support this bill, but there was an awful lot of resistance to this bill. So right now this bill is being held over or laid over. It may be stalled for this session. Okay, the ban on plastic bag bans. Yes, amazingly enough, There is currently a law prohibiting cities in Minnesota from enacting their own plastic bag bans. It is estimated that Americans use 100 billion plastic bags a year, which requires 12 million barrels of oil to manufacture. This law needs to be overturned to allow local control to create a pathway to reduce plastic bag usage. MPCA states that Minnesota plastic bag recycling is less than 10%. You can charge for plastic bags, and Minneapolis and Duluth do charge 5 cents per bag. Okay, so the Congress also has a plastic bill going. It's called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act of 2023. It was started last fall, which amended the Solid Waste Disposal Act, first introduced in 2021. It builds on statewide laws across the country and outlines plastic reduction strategies. This bill will do this by reducing plastic production before it ever has a chance to pollute, increasing recycling rates, and protecting frontline and fence line communities. The Senate bill was introduced by Jeff Merkley of Oregon, and the Senate has 11 co-sponsors, but none are from Minnesota. House Resolution 6053 has 63 co-sponsors, including Representative Betty McCullen and Representative Elon Omar. The last action taken on the House was in January. Again, this is a bill you could ask your representatives or senators to support. We do have a few wins. There's a few wins out there. 3M announced that they are going to stop manufacturing PFAS by 2025. Outdoor retailer REI announced that it will phase out toxic PFAS in their clothing and outdoor gear and cookware that it sells. Last December, Environmental Protection Agency announced that it will include vinyl chloride in its short list of chemicals for risk evaluation. This is just the first step required to ban this substance under the Federal Toxic Substances Control Act. Vinyl chloride, just to remind you, that was the chemical that was found in 5 tankers that derailed in a train disaster in East Palestine, Ohio. Those tankers contained vinyl chloride. And what did they do? They burned them because there was a danger of explosion. That was a very toxic decision. Okay, so hopefully vinyl chloride will get banned. Okay, the next win was Aldi's. They became the first major U.S. retailer to eliminate plastic shopping bags from stores. That was, at the end of 2023.
Excellent. So we've established that plastics are a massive problem, and recycling isn't the ultimate solution, but it is an action that we can take now, at least with some plastics. So we want to start with a little quiz. So go ahead and put your answers into the chat. What % of its plastic does the US recycle? Is it 5%, 35%, 50%, or 75%? And I'll give you guys just a minute to put some answers in the chat. Yes, It is only about 5% of the 46 million tons of waste in 2021 was recycled. And that's actually going down in terms of a percentage. It was estimated to be closer to 9% a few years ago. And we look at our recycling goals, and this is recycling overall, not just plastic. Currently, the national recycling rate is about 32%, and there's a goal of 50% by 2030. Here in Minnesota, as a state, we actually have a pretty good recycling rate compared to other states. We're at about 45%. The state's recycling goal is 75% for the Twin Cities by 2030 and 35% for the rest of the state. So we are falling well short of those goals. Here in Minnesota, recycling can be confusing, but the confusion really stems from plastic, mostly because not all plastic can be recycled. If you look at the stats here in Minnesota, about 94% of steel cans are recycled. Glass is about 70%. Plastic is just 10%. And that's a really low number, but also remember that our plastic recycling rate here is almost double the national rate. And it's still, only 10%. So if you look at this chart here, so this is kind of similar to what Jane showed earlier, showing plastics production, but this also looks at the recycling rate. So nationally in 2018, we were at about 8.7%. So, but in 2021, that was down to 5 to 6%, and we were up to 46 million tons, where before we were at about 36. So, and these rates are probably even lower because it doesn't count recycled plastic that ends up being burned because it wasn't actually recyclable. So where our greatest potential is to increase these recycling rates is with numbers 1, 2, and 4. 1 are those plastic bottles, the water bottles, that sort of thing. Type 2, milk jugs, laundry jugs, cosmetic containers. And then number 4 is plastic bags. So this is where we have the greatest potential to be able to increase that recycling. It's always important to note that that little symbol does not mean that it's recyclable, which you can, in the metro area for curbside, they accept 1, 2, and 5. So those drink bottles, the detergent shampoo bottles, that sort of thing, plastic bottle tops, the little yogurt pots, those are made of the 5. And then so the 3 that are starred, you can do in your curbside. The one with the asterisk, that's the plastic bags. Those can be recycled, but they have to be brought to a drop-off location. They cannot be put in your curbside recycling. So if you look at the plastic recycling process, first they wash everything to remove labels and impurities, and they sort them by type, and then they're ground into flakes. And then those flakes are melted into pellets, which are used to be able to create new products. The problem is most plastic can only be recycled 1 to 3 times. It cannot be recycled indefinitely the way that glass and metal can. So we can't recycle our way out of this problem. When it comes to recycling, 1, 2, and 5, this is your curbside recycling. They are widely accepted. What you need to do is just empty, rinse, and leave the cap on. When we did this presentation yesterday, one of the questions was, how well do I need to wash it? Give it a rinse, give it a good scrape if it's something like peanut butter, but it does not need to be 100% clean. But they do ask that you leave the caps on because those caps are so small that they can jam up the equipment. It's important to note that black plastic is not recyclable at all. Because the sorters, they use infrared sensors, and they can't sort black plastic into the correct category because of its dark color. So we cannot actually, all those takeout containers, none of that can be recycled. And while you can't recycle your black plastic through curbside recycling, Lowe's accepts the plastic trays, pots, and tags that you might get for gardening, and Home Depot will accept the pots. So that is a good alternative to recycle those sorts of things that you can't normally do through regular curbside collection. Okay, another quiz. On average, how long is a plastic bag used by a person before being thrown away? Is it 12 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 week? How long is that average use of a plastic bag? Got some answers coming in. See a 1 hour, see some 12 minutes. The answer to that is actually 12 minutes. The working life of a plastic bag is 12 minutes. Globally, 1 million plastic bags are used each minute, and 1% of them are recycled. And most of them make their way to the ocean. So plastic bags are a big problem. Now, they are highly recyclable, but they can't go in your curbside. But you can drop them off at grocery stores. Cub, Lunds and Byerly's, Target, they all accept plastic bags. Usually at the front of the store, there's a collection bin where you can stuff your plastic bags in. The reason they can't go into the curbside recycling, as this picture shows, they actually get caught in the line and they jam up the recycling conveyors. So putting those in the recycling just causes huge amounts of problems for your recyclers. Okay, another quiz question. Americans use about how many plastic drinking straws per day? 25,000, 100,000, 250 million, or 500 million? What do you guys think? Okay, seeing a lot of C's coming through here. The answer is actually 500 million. On average, Americans use 1.6 plastic drinking straws every day. That's enough to fill 125 school buses a day, or 45,625 school buses a year. They might not seem like a lot of plastic when you're using one, but they add up really quickly. So instead of getting plastic straws at restaurants or cafes, you can bring your own reusable straw or just avoid a straw, because the thing with straws is they're too small to be recycled. You cannot put plastic straws into your recycling. The same goes for those little coffee pods. And a lot of times those coffee pods, they'll have a recycling symbol on the bottom. They're actually too small to recycle. So there are several states that have already banned the use of single-use plastic straws just because of the amount of waste that comes from them. As these are too small to recycle, some things are too big. Buckets, laundry baskets, kitty litter tubs, those big totes that we're so fond of storing things in, all of those are too big to be recycled. So if you're using those and you're choosing to buy plastic there, know that it's just going to end up in a landfill somewhere. There's no chance of ever recycling that. So the next thing we want to talk about was wish cycling. And wish cycling is tossing items into your recycling and hoping that they're going to get recycled, even though they probably won't be. And, just because that item has the recycling symbol doesn't mean that it can actually be recycled. You should really talk to your, usually your local hauler will have like an info sheet of everything that can be recycled. The biggest problem with wish cycling, though, is it can contaminate other things that are with it. So things that could otherwise be recycled are now trash because they've been contaminated due to wish cycling. So we really want to keep what we are recycling just to the things that the haulers will actually accept. Another thing just to be aware of is the concept of greenwashing. And this is when a company makes misleading statements about their products or organization. And that can be really large scale, like a company calling themselves eco-friendly while simultaneously having oil spills. Or it could be very subtle, like water bottles with, the mountain spring and the greenery, and it just looks beautiful. And obviously, that must be eco-friendly. So you'll see a lot of those buzzwords, we're sustainable, we're non-toxic. There's nobody checking up on those words. That's just the company saying whatever they want. And it might be in some cases that they really do, they live their mantra, but in many cases it's not. So just because it says it's recyclable, all natural, biodegradable, or eco-friendly does not mean that it actually is. And now I will turn this over to Liz.
Well, thanks, Kitty. I mean, after hearing all these dire statistics about what plastics are doing to our bodies and to our environment, you were probably thinking to yourself, I have to do something. The problem seems so enormous, so what can one person do? Well, we've got another little quiz here that we're hoping that you can take. We want to know if you think that it is possible, true or false, that there are many alternatives to single-use plastics. What do you think? Eddie, can you advance the slide, please? Okay, I think this is kind of a gimme, kind of a throwaway question. I mean, we're going to give you a little hope here. So yes, the answer is true, that there are many alternatives to single-use plastic products. So we're going to tell you about a few of those. You can, we're going to talk about things that you can do at home and things that you can do away from home that are alternatives to single-use plastics. So you can talk about reusable bags, stainless steel travel mugs, and giving up plastic is as simple as a single choice. And if you have want to have more ideas, you can check out Beth Terry's blog, 100 Steps to a Plastic-Free Life, and we're going to put that in our resources. Okay, so next slide. I'm going to give you some suggestions about alternatives to plastic, and they're going to be both in the home and away from home. So away from home, you can bring your own bag to go to the grocery store. And this can include not only the bag that you carry your groceries in, but also like a cotton mesh produce bag that you can use to put your apples and your oranges in. And you can use bring your own refillable, reusable coffee mug to the coffee shop instead of having their paper cups or their EGADs, styrofoam cups. We heard about how bad those are. You can bring your own takeout containers to a restaurant instead of using their little clamshell styrofoam ones. You can bring your own, hopefully not plastic, takeout container with you and your own cutlery. You can eat the ice cream in a cone as opposed to a plastic lined cup, paper cup, and you'd much rather eat the cone than throw away the cup that is not recyclable. You can use a refillable, reusable stainless steel water bottle with tap water instead of buying the bottled water, which we've heard is so bad for us. And you can bring back those little berry or tomato boxes that you get at the store, and you can give them to a farmer at the farmer's market, and they can reuse those and sell the berries and the tomatoes to the next person. Then at home, you can fill a reusable spray bottle with your own cleaning solution. You don't have to buy this cleaning solution that's in the stores. You can buy dish soap and in a cardboard box, and as opposed to the liquid soap or those pods. Don't use those pods. So you can buy bar soaps and for your hand washing, and then shampoos also come as bars. You can buy bar soap for your shampoo. There are plastic-free options for things like toothbrushes and dental floss. You can use bamboo toothbrushes, and you can use glass containers that have the dental floss in them. You can buy milk and other beverages in glass bottles, and you can buy products in bulk and repackage them in glass bottles or silicone containers. Okay, let's see. And then at home, for food, you can use things like a bento or a tiffin box, which are compartmentalized storage containers that can keep your lettuce and your salad dressing separate. And they can be made out of stainless steel or glass. You can get beeswax coated fabric instead of plastic wrap, and you can sometimes make your own. I've seen some do-it-yourself websites where you just get some paraffin wax pellets, melt it, put it on some fabric, and you've got your own reusable beeswax coated fabric. So then there's also reusable glass jars and bottles, stainless steel, and reusable silicone. And then the cotton mesh bag for your produce. So all of these things you can use to use less plastic. And I'm going to then switch over to Dan, who's going to talk about microplastics.
Thank you, Liz. As Jane mentioned, there's a growing body of evidence that microplastics are an accumulating problem within the world's oceans and water systems. So just a quick question here. What is the most or the biggest source of microplastic in the world's oceans? We have plastic pellets, synthetic textiles, city dust, and road tires. See some plastic pellets and synthetic textiles. All right, lots of B's, lots of A's. And the answer is synthetic textiles. 35% of microplastics currently in the world's oceans are the result of synthetic textiles. As research by the University of Plymouth revealed, if you have synthetic fabrics in your wardrobe, you're actively contributing to the problem every time you throw the clothes in the washing machine. Of the 3 fabric types tested, acrylic was found to be the worst offender. A poly blend is less serious in terms of impact, but 100% natural fibers are the best way to reduce the microplastic footprint of your wardrobe. Extra little, all right. Let's see. So ways to reduce your impact to the world's oceans and waterways: you can buy natural fiber clothing. You can purchase products like a laundry ball, which will capture the microfibers as they're sloughed off in your washing machine. You can have a microfiber laundry bag, which reduces the wear and breakage of those microfibers while in the wash and also captures those fibers. And then you can install a laundry filter after your washing machine to catch those microfibers as they're ejected from the washing machine. Tire abrasion actually accounts for 28% of microplastic pollution. So remember, the second that you can actually reduce the amount of microplastics by taking public transport or reducing the amount that you're driving. All right. Here are the top 6 things you can do now. Work towards zero waste, reduce the plastics that you use, be mindful of microplastics, change your purchasing habits, cut down or just refuse single-use plastics, and avoid plastic or food prep and storage. And then another way to remember this is the 5 R's of sustainability and zero waste management: refuse plastics, reduce plastics, reuse plastics, repurpose plastics, and recycle plastics. And then this has been a heavy topic, so we'll end with a little bit of levity here. So here we see that this retailer is reducing their plastics, but you're surrounded by plastic packaging. So it's a thing to consider as you're navigating the shopping environment. All right, we'll open it back up for any questions and discussions.
Okay, and Fern, we did have a question that came in for you. So that first, the EPR bill, have any of our representatives signed on to either of those bills?
Oh, yes. Well, Brian Curran is a co-sponsor of that one. And I guess I don't know of all the other people that do that are on that one, but anyway, if you do write in and Brian is your rep, then you can thank her for supporting that bill.
Okay, and then we had another one come in that I think I'm going to throw to Jane. So Jane, is Tupperware good?
No. Sorry. Get rid of all your plastic food containers and go with glass or metal. There are some silicones that are okay, but it's really complicated to figure out if they are okay or not, because silicone can be made from silicone sand or it can be made from plastic. So you have to do a bunch of research. It's really a pain.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, the resources that we have available for you today are pretty comprehensive. We strongly urge you to check them out. They're both a lot of good resources from Jane. There's products that you can buy. A lot of information in there. It's definitely worth a look through. There's also the sources of anything that we have, anything that we've presented today. If you want to read more about it, you can access the actual sources through there.
Can I just add that there's a film that just came out that's the best film I've seen yet on health effects, and it's called We Are All Plastic People Now. It was put together by PBS, and the producer was Fielding. I can't remember the first name, but somebody Fielding. I would highly recommend watching that and showing it to groups, because people need to get educated on the health effects, and they're not aware of how serious the health effects are.
Excellent. I just put the link to that in the chat too. So if anybody wants a quick link to that, We Are All Plastic Now is in the chat.
I'm going to show it to our church group and open it up to the public too, to come and see it.
So we will be having this presentation on our website, the recorded version. And I think we'll have our presentation also there, right, Ketty?
The resources in the presentation will be.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if somebody missed the presentation, or you'd like to refer other people to watch it, it will be on our website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.